Well, good afternoon and welcome to H360 Live. My name is Dave Duplay and I'm joined here in the studio this afternoon by my friend and colleague from Healthy h360, Miss Courtland Long. Courtland, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. You know, we've got a great show coming up for our audience today. We have Tony Russo from Russo Partners going to be in the studio, and I'm so anxious to have him in because his firm, which is a specialty PR firm here in New York City, is doing some great work with some of the most innovative biotech and healthcare companies on the planet, helping them bring new products to market faster and communicate to patients and caregivers in a more succinct and better way. So Courtland, I can't wait to get him in.
Me neither. You know, we had the opportunity to meet with a lot of their clients when we were at the JP Morgan Annual Health Conference. And it's going to be really exciting to talk with Tony a little bit more in depth in the work that he's doing with some of these major biotech and medical device companies.
Yeah, you know, and one of the things that set them apart is their staff. They're, you know, they're so educated and they've been in the field of medicine and biotech and device before coming to Russo Partners, so can't wait to get them in. But first, we have some health tips for you today. And Courtland, I think we're going to take a little bit of a different angle on what we normally do with our health tips, but this is an area that I'm very interested in, particularly, and we're going to be talking about clinical trials.
Yes, we are. This week we're taking a little bit of a different spin. Normally we try to give some tips on how to live happy and healthy lives, but this week we're really going to be debunking some of the common myths surrounding clinical trials. And we think that this is really important to remove the fears and the barriers of enrollment for clinical trials. So we'll just jump right in, and the first myth is that cancer clinical trials administer sugar pills. Now it's really important to debunk this myth because the fact is that placebos or sugar pills are rarely used in clinical trials and they're never going to replace treatment. In fact, if you are enrolled in a clinical trial, you will be receiving the best treatment available for your specific type and stage of cancer.
Now, Courtland, debunking, is that a technical term?
Yeah.
I like that, and we are debunking because that's a good point, you know, and it leads me right into the second point, which you kind of hit on a little bit, and that's the quality of care when you're enrolled in a clinical trial. So, yes, you're right, your first point that you make about, you know, getting the best treatment, getting the treatment that's on the market today, right, and available to patients, is one thing, but then the clinical trial bringing new and innovative products to market. But there's this perception that people in clinical trials may not be getting the best clinical care, and that absolutely is not true. You know, the clinical trials that are conducted around the world today are conducted at some of the most prestigious medical institutions that there are. And some of these doctors who are clinical investigators in these clinical trials are key opinion leaders in their own right, specializing in the area of medicine that they practice. So you're really getting top-notch quality care. And, you know, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the clinical research organizations, and just the fear fact of the way that they track progress in these clinical trials and all the health information suggests that the care is top-notch.
Oh, the care is absolutely spectacular. And like you said, they're at major medical centers, and so you're definitely going to be treated like a very important patient, a VIP. And so the third myth that we want to debunk today is that clinical trials are only for patients with terminal cancer. Now, it is certainly true that sometimes clinical trials may be a last resort for treatment, but many times clinical trials are actually just sort of creating a little addition to the standard of care or adjusting the standard of care for patients to lead a little bit better lives.
You know, I know we're focusing a lot on cancer in our debunking here, but it really runs across the board of all conditions.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, I agree with you that, I mean, you look at clinical trials, you look at enrollment, you look at bringing new products to market, and these are some of the most important things. So, you know, the clinical care, again, and the sugar pills, these are all myths that we do need to debunk.
Yeah, it's really important because clinical trials are how we keep the general public safe and how we keep these innovative therapies coming to market better.
Yeah, and you know, as you pointed out, sometimes clinical trials is the last resort. These patients have been on therapy that just may not be working for them. And so the opportunity to enroll in a clinical trial and get advanced care and new and innovative therapies really could help, prolong and let them lead a little better life living with the condition that they live with.
Yeah, I think it's very important to try to find out a little bit more information about clinical trials. So if you have any further questions, you can check out clinicaltrials.gov.
Yeah, that's a great website. All the clinical trials, at least in the U.S., that are being conducted today are on that website. So if you have any questions at all, again, clinicaltrials.gov, great website for you to go to. Well, Courtland, before we bring Tony in, we've got our interns out in the field in New York talking to our New Yorkers exactly about what they know about clinical trials, their perceptions, and see if they have some of the myths that we have tried to debunk today. So you want to watch it with me?
I would love to.
Okay, guys, please roll the video.
Do you know what are clinical trials?
That's when they take something and they test it before they deliver it to the masses or whatever they're looking to do.
So I believe a clinical trial is where a new medicine or a procedure, a new medical procedure is tried or
introduced.
I'm searching, introduced, looking for the
Yeah.
words, to a small population to determine whether or not it's safe for the general population.
Yeah.
Studies about different things, like whether it's a disease or anything like that.
Clinical trials are, scientifically controlled trials where there's a standard, and then there's something you're testing against the standard, so a control group and a non-control group.
Yeah.
And you could be testing anything, so you could be testing drugs, you could be testing behavior, but it's basically people don't know which group they're in.
Do you feel that clinical trials are important?
Yes, I do. I think they help keep the general public safe and can help identify new and promising medicines or procedures that will help people in need.
Yes, because they help prevent bias in trial. If a scientist is very interested in getting a drug passed through, if he knows which group we need the scientific method to basically see whether there are real effects or not.
I believe so, because you wouldn't want to find out in a negative way on the public. You want to test that in a controlled environment where if something does go wrong, then you can fix it and adjust it as necessary.
Yeah. Do you know anyone that has participated in a clinical trial?
I have. It was when I was college and really broke. So they had me come in once a week and tested my blood. They were looking for women who were not on birth control.
Okay.
So I think they were probably testing some sort of birth control.
Okay.
My grandparents are in a clinical trial right now for Alzheimer's, so they have to go once a month to the doctor. They have to take a pill 3 pills every day, so like that.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with anyone that's participated in a clinical trial, and I certainly haven't.
Okay. All right, well, the last question is, if you were given the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial that was beneficial to you, would you consider it?
I would definitely consider it, because I think if you're helping the greater good and if it's going to help me too,
Exactly.
that's doing two good things with one stone.
Exactly.
I would consider it.
I'd have to study the issue a lot. I'd have to understand the pros and cons, and it would have to be for something that I needed help with, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. If it was something I needed help with and there was a chance of helping me and a low risk of hurting me, then I would probably consider it, yes.
Okay.
Well, Courtland, what'd you think?
It was an excellent video. A lot of the New Yorkers that Olivia, our intern, interviewed really seemed to know a lot about clinical trials, and it was great to see that one young woman had actually participated in one.
I was so surprised, you're right, about these folks knew a lot about clinical trials and their willingness, if they had a condition and they were a candidate for a clinical trial, to get in there and participate, all for the better good, bringing these drugs to market quicker.
It was very encouraging that our debunking of these myths may actually have done some good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you liked it, hashtag to the right real stories is what we hashtag. We hope you do the same. Well, Courtland, our favorite time of the show, Tony Russo is in the studio with us, and I can't wait to get this conversation started. But before we do, I want to give everybody a little ground setting here on clinical trials. So the purpose of a clinical trial is to develop and bring to the market new and effective treatments for disease. We're going to talk to Tony all about that. A few years ago, there was a survey that was done, and over 15,000 drugs in the research pipeline and about 2.5 million clinical trial volunteers. So we've got a lot of drugs in the pipeline. We need more volunteers. We've got to get people enrolled in clinical trials. And each clinical trial has eligibility criteria. You may or may not qualify, and those criteria tend to center around your disease, what stage it's at, your treatment history, your gender, your age. So there's a lot of criteria, Courtland, that go into this. Well, Tony, thanks so much for coming on H360 Live. You know, we've had the privilege of sitting with some of your clients at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, and what you guys are doing in helping them communicate to patients and caregivers is really, really important work. So I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, well, Tony, let's jump right in and kind of give a little bit of a baseline about Russo Partners. Can you give us some history of the firm, the kinds of clients you guys serve, and really what sets you apart from other PR firms?
Sure. Well, we were established in 1988, so we're in our 28th year right now. And we were established as a healthcare company. And so in 1988, if you can imagine, there were no healthcare public relations firms. So we were among the very first. And as a healthcare agency, I always felt that we needed to recruit people who knew science. So many of our staff have PhDs, they have MDs, they all come out of a science and healthcare background. And that's one of the ways which, to this day, we're different than other agencies, because we know and we understand the patient, we know the science, and we're able to communicate that. So we're able to take things to another level. And in these days of genomics and genetic medicine, it's gotten a lot more complicated. So to be able to understand the underlying science, the condition, we know so much more about disease today. We know about the genetics of disease. That takes a certain skill set, and that's what our employees have. So we work with young companies that have drugs in clinical trials. Most of our clients don't have drugs on the market yet, or they may have devices or diagnostics that are going through the clinical trial process. And we work with those companies in terms of putting together their materials, talking about their story, understanding what's relevant to a patient and the patient experience, and helping the patient through their journey in terms of being able to understand their condition and better advocate for themselves and their disease.
You know, Tony, you make a good point. You have to know the science, and today it is getting more and more complicated with precision medicine and personalized medicine, and the availability of information on the internet alone, right? For these patients and caregivers, we've got to bring good quality communication and information to the forefront. To me, that's the most important. Tell us, how are you able to attract these individuals? I mean, if I'm a MD and I'm practicing medicine, what's going to bring me to Russo Partners?
Well, it's funny you say that, Dave. Just this morning I had an interview with an MD. This was an individual who had done his residency in neuroscience, but he told me that he did not want to do clinical medicine, that he wanted to communicate the science, he wanted to work with companies that had innovative therapies, and that he felt at this stage in his life, and he was a young kid, he was under 30, that he wanted to take what he had learned in medical school and apply it to helping patients in a broader context.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, a lot of companies want to get closer to the patient, and today there's this notion of going beyond the pill. So can you share with us sort of what this phrase means to you and how you help your clients get there?
Well, I think today, and this was true even 30 years ago, but when someone learns that they have a disease, they become an instant expert. So 30 years ago, they may have gone to their medical library and researched a disease and made lots of photocopies of peer-reviewed articles. But today, it's so much easier, and everyone becomes an expert within a day or two. Mm-hmm. They become conversant to the point where they're able to go toe-to-toe with people that have been practicing in their given disease area for years and years and years. And so the information that you put out is important. And I'm sure that many of the patients who are watching today have had the experience where they go to the internet and they suddenly find horrible things that are going to happen to them once they look up their condition. We try and make sure that what's out there is accurate, that it reflects what is really going on with patients. So a lot of our materials, whether it's the website for our client or whether it's Wikipedia or other sources that patients might go to, we want to make sure that that's accurate information and that it contains all the information that people need to know about. And we really see it not just about the drug itself or the particular treatment, but the whole process, the patient journey in terms of what to ask, who are the professionals that they should be seeing, what are the other treatments that are on the market, what's the history of a particular drug. There are a lot of questions that people are going to ask, and we need to make sure that that information is accurate and that they have access to people who can help them out.
You know, you make a good point. And we had a lady come in here who 20 years ago was given 6 months to live. Okay, that was 20 years ago. 7 tumors in her abdomen. And, you know, her physician was going to put her on a course of therapy that was on the market today. And she said, you know, and this is getting back to the availability of information and patients going toe-to-toe. And she said to her physician, you know, you have 100 patients to worry about. I have just one, me, right? And so she immersed herself and she enrolled in a clinical study, and it was a combination therapy. And again, you know, 20 years ago, she was given 6 months to live, and she's living a productive life today. So having the information, one, to understand what's going on in her healthcare journey, and two, something to do about it, I think is really important. And that's where you guys at Russo are really coming in and making a difference. You know, going in what Courtland was saying about going beyond the pill, you know, I remember back 10, 15 years ago, if I were to go to a pharmaceutical company and I were to say to an executive, well, what industry are you in? He would have said, well, I'm in the drug development, or I'm in the drug industry, or the pharmaceutical industry. You walk down the halls of any major pharmaceutical company today or biotech company, and they ask them what industry they're in. They're in the healthcare industry, and they're focused not only on what pill or discovery therapeutically they're bringing to market, but overall health and wellness. How do you guys at Russo kind of take a step back? And to me, the industry's made a big shift in saying, I'm in the drug business or I'm in the pharmaceutical industry, now I'm in the total health business. How do you guys at Russo think about that and instruct or help your clients to communicate that message?
Well, the patient has to be at the center of the healthcare experience. I mean, they are the ones that are using the device or taking the pill or treatment. But what does that mean? What does that mean? Does it mean that they need to be compliant, or does it mean that they need to ask the right questions? And I think your point is a very good one. For patients, they may see their doctor. Their doctor sees maybe a few of those kinds of patients that have the disease that he or she has, but they're not as current, perhaps, as the patient might be, who's been reading the latest peer-reviewed articles, who's been attending scientific meetings. And I go to scientific meetings these days, and there are patients there. 20 years ago, you would never find a patient in the room. They're able to understand what's going on, what other doctors are saying. And so because of that, they're able to ask a lot of the right questions, and they know a lot more about perhaps what's going on in the field, perhaps how they should be diagnosed, about different types of diagnoses. And I think pharmaceutical companies, drug development companies understand that now. And so they're bringing the patient into the process, going on that journey with them, understanding what are the issues that they're confronting, what are the compliance issues that may be facing a patient, what are their concerns. And that so much is a part of the ability of a company to better work with an individual.
Yep.
So you just mentioned about knowing the history of medications and making sure that the patient is at the center of that care, and patients are going to a lot of these meetings and talking with pharma companies. And we know that the drug development process is a really long and arduous process, and the patient certainly needs to be more involved in it. So how can we make sure that the patient is getting more involved and also bringing these treatments to market efficiently?
Well, patients usually, at the very least, they're going to the internet. So first and foremost, we have to make sure that there's information out there for them. Secondly, they're going to get involved on the advocacy side. And so educating the advocacy groups about a drug is going to be important, or a way to diagnose a disease. So companies need to spend time educating the advocates and educating the physicians as well. So it's an iterative process, I think, for the consumer of healthcare, as well as the providers of healthcare. And our role is really to make sure that people understand what companies are doing and understand the data that's coming out, and that they're a part of the education process.
I want to take another step back for a minute, because we hit on a couple of important points here. And that's the patient is at the center of the healthcare equation. And everything that we've tried to do here at Healthy h360 puts the patient-physician relationship at the center of the universe. And I've seen over my career, especially over the last 5 to 8 years or so, as technology has rapidly developed, the internet, wearable devices, iPhone and Android apps, right, all in the spirit of delivering better health, that there are some companies out there that try to disintermediate the patient-physician relationship, whether it's by gathering data and harnessing it or some other means. And I'd like to know your opinion on that. When you see companies that don't have the same view that you share and I share about keeping the patient and physician at the center of the universe, what do you say to prospective clients like that?
Well, I think we learned something from AIDS in the 1980s, and that was that really for the first time, patients with a particular condition advocate for clinical trials for drugs to get on the market sooner, quicker. And I think in the same way, patients really need to continue to advocate for themselves because no one else is going to do it for them. Whether it's for a new treatment that may be slightly more expensive that's coming on the market, or whether it's for a way to better diagnose a disease. Patients really need to be a part of that process. And you know, just as we go out and we vote for the people who we believe in, patients have to vote for themselves, and they have to vote for their condition. And the only way they can do that is through advocacy.
Yeah.
So a little earlier in the show, you had mentioned the importance of the internet for educating patients and patients learning about their conditions, the diagnostic tools and the treatments out there for them. So I really want to step to the digital space right now. And let's start with social media. So what is the role of social media in facilitating communication between the drug companies and patients and caregivers?
I think it's critical. It's right there at the center of that conversation. When people have a disease, they go to the chat rooms. They find the organizations where they can have a conversation about their condition, about their symptoms, about perhaps some of the other treatments that are on the market, about the clinical trials that are going on and where they're going on, and the ways that they can get into the trials to better understand those trials. So social media plays a very important role. And for us at Russo Partners, we want to be a part of that discussion as well, because we want to make sure that what is said on the social media is accurate, that the wrong information isn't being filtered out there, and that if people have questions, that they're getting the answers to those questions. So I think social media is incredibly important.
You know, we're told here at Healthio360 all the time that coming to our platform and sharing their story, one, for the person sharing is so therapeutic, and then on the other side of the coin, for the person listening, they feel like they're not alone. And so having that community, I think it's always easier to learn from people who've walked a mile in your footsteps, right? And have, you know, been on that journey, because you can kind of look at where they've been. Maybe they're a little ahead in the journey than you are, and really learn from that. So how do you see, you know, these, we've got patient advocacy groups, and then we've got social media. How do you see them coming together, and what's the role that each can play to support each other?
Well, just to comment on your point, I mean, it's so true today that particularly in areas such as rare disease, where there might be one person with that disease, but that person is 300 miles away, to be able to suddenly communicate with that person is terrific. And so getting to your question, what does this all mean? And what does it mean on the advocacy side? It means that advocacy organizations need to not just produce recommendations, but to listen to that conversation. And they need to take that information and advocate for their audience. And so the dialogue is one that's a much richer dialogue than it would have been 10 years ago. I think whether years ago we had newsletters that would go out, and it was a very one-way dialogue, but now it's going on between patient, between doctor, between advocacy organization, among patients. And it's much richer, and I think when you have that sort of information that's being passed among individuals, you can put together a better product, a better experience for the patient. You have more knowledge as far as what works, what doesn't work, how to think about disease, how to treat disease, than you have in the past.
Yep.
Well, we've been talking about how the internet can be both a good and a bad place for finding information, and your team at Russo works very hard to make sure that the false information isn't getting out there to patients and caregivers. So how does your team work to make sure that the true and accurate information is filtering up to those patients?
Well, we I think by just being current on what's being said, by monitoring the websites every day, really every hour, and making sure that even our own clients' websites are current. Very often, I'm sure some of the people watching this show have had the experience where they work with a company whose website is ancient and maybe a year out of date. That can't be the case in our industry. We want to make sure that the information is accurate and it reflects the current sentiment, and that the latest articles are there, they're posted, they're peer-reviewed articles, whatever information that we have that can be relevant, and give us the ability to be transparent is what we seek to do. And that's not always easy, because there are probably thousands of peer-reviewed articles that come out every day. And there's information on conditions that are written by people not only in the U.S. but in other countries as well. And so it's very much a flat world. And to be able to keep up with that information, to be able to weigh in on that discussion is a challenge. And for many companies, they don't really have the time to do that. They're so busy doing the work of drug development that they're focused on other things. And that's the role that we play with those organizations.
Well, you know, I think you hit on a good point. Information, transparency, it's the way it has to be, because too many lives depend on it. So Tony,
Exactly.
you guys at Russo are doing a great job. I really like the way you're working with clients. I like the way you've worked with our organization as well. In full transparency, Russo Partners has helped us better communicate to you folks there and bring you the quality of information and shows that are most important to you. So Tony, I'd like to thank you once again for coming in and joining us. I'd like to thank the viewers for tuning in, and I'd like to thank our sponsors for making this all possible. Remember, all of our episodes can be viewed on demand at healthyho360.com, and our podcast can be found in the iTunes store. Well, we just talked about social media, and we're all over it, and Courtland's going to share with you our thoughts on that.
Well, we love Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and we use the hashtag #RealStories when posting, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you would do the same. On behalf of Dave Duplay, myself, and the entire HealthyO360 family, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week when we're chatting with Dr. Lynn of Mount Sinai all about obstructive sleep apnea.